Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing a very cool team that just made it to Legend Rank in the Open Great League. Now, these battles were submitted to the channel by a member of the community, Baj2018, so many thanks for the battle submission. Now, what I think is really cool about this team is it features a Pokemon that has been a favorite of mine ever since it was introduced, and that is Skeledirge. Skeledirge had a moment where it was top Open Great League meta. Now, it has fallen off in usage over time, but on this team, it is an absolute star paired up with a Shadow Malamar and Pangoro. So, without further ado, let's hop into the matches. And in game number 1, Skeledirge picks up a very strong lead leading into Walrein. Walrein will get absolutely crushed here. Opponent safe switches into Furret, and Furret's immediately going to be hard punished with Pangoro. Pangoro has such an incredibly dominant matchup here, even more so because this Furret is running Trailblaze instead of Brick Break. Because of that, they're forced to go for Swift into Pangoro, and Pangoro can very comfortably survive that damage. Close combat lands, Furret gets KO'd. The opponent so far is ABA weak to fighting, and it appears they are even weaker to Pangoro than I could have imagined because they're sending in Walrein. Unfortunately, Pangoro not going to get the back-to-back Night Slashes here, only going to get one, but in comes Skeledirge. There's the switch in the back. They have an astonished Golurk. What is this thing doing in the 2900s? That is not what I was expecting to see whatsoever, but this Golurk is getting absolutely torn to smithereens by the Psywaves. I do really like Golurk as a Pokemon. Unfortunately, it's a lot more difficult to use now than it ever has been in the past. Golurk gets KO'd, in comes Walrein, but this is a very clear path to victory in this game. There's a ton of energy on the Skeledirge, and Malamar gets to put up the shield and make it to the Superpower. Superpower is guaranteeing the final shield, and the moment that shield is down, it's Skeledirge time. In comes Skeledirge, Shadow Ball is reached. Walrein is very bulky, I think it can hold on, but it's not going to matter. Walrein needs an Earthquake, they can never get there, and that's going to be a Game 1 win. Hopping into game number 2, leading Skeledirge into Corviknight. Wow, this is a dominant lead win for the Skeledirge. The Corviknight is not switching out, so clearly something in the back is also weak to Skeledirge. Opponent doesn't even build up to the payback, they're just going to go for the Air Cutter, but Skeledirge will put up the shield, because if the opponent's staying in, then Skeledirge is going to have massive value against one of their final 2 Pokemon. Torch Song is launched, Corviknight no shields, and they will get KO'd. In comes Corsola, there's a pivot out into the Shadow Malamar. In the back is Meowscarada, and now we see why the opponent had to stay in that lead matchup, as they are running a team that is ABA weak to fire. Not only that, but their remaining Pokemon also get absolutely destroyed by Pangoro. So even if it's not Skeledirge taking the win, that Pangoro is in perfect position to close out the game. The opponent's forced to go down both shields. They're farming up as much energy as they possibly can. Night Slash is going to be knocking out the Malamar, and now in comes Skeledirge. Meowscarada did actually get the Night Slash boost. It's only a 1-stage boost this season instead of the usual 2. This is going to be a charge type priority tie that Skeledirge is not going to win, but unfortunately for the opponent, the damage is already done. The Meowscarada is far too low. In comes Pangoro, answered by the Corsola, but Corsola is completely walled. Corsola just cannot do enough damage to this Pangoro. Pangoro already at the back-to-back Night Slashes. Night Slash number 1 is going to connect, not going to go for the charge type priority tie, instead ensuring that Pangoro will be able to overfarm enough to outpace the Meowscarada. So Pangoro farms up to 1.5 Night Slashes. Corsola will not be able to survive, and the Meowscarada is low enough that it's just going to get knocked out by the Night Slash. Back in comes Meowscarada, but it's too little too late. Pangoro takes the knockout and gets the boost as the opponent gets KO'd. We move to game number 3. I don't know what the visuals were at the start of that game. That looked a bit odd, but unfortunately, pretty badly this time, Skeledirge into the Corsola. Corsola answered with a save switch in a Malamar. That's going to be met with a Wigglytuff. So far, a pretty rough start to the game, but the Wigglytuff had to be baited out if Pangoro is going to sweep. Shadow Malamar lands the Superpower. Opponent does not want to risk a potential second charge attack from the Malamar, and instead, they fire off the Swift to take the knockout. But that's going to prove to be a pretty big error, as that just gives massive farm to the Skeledirge, and now when Corsola gets brought back in, Corsola's going to actually have to put up the shield or take massive damage from a Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball into the Corsola will be shielded. Pangoro hits the field. Pangoro will still take a decent amount of damage from Nightshade here, because Pangoro is going to need to try and 1v2. So even though Nightshade is resisted, it would probably be worth Pangoro actually putting up the shield. And that's exactly what it's going to do. Investing in the Pangoro, because if the opponent's not pivoting out, it appears they are core broken. Night Slash launched at the Corsola. Corsola has to put up the shield or lose all their energy. They put up the shield. They will barely outpace the Pangoro. Pangoro has to decide, is this worth the final shield? No. That's going to be a no shield. Nightshade is survivable. Clearly the opponent was ABA weak to Pangoro, as once they see that no shield, they immediately resign the match. We've got some spice from the opponent in the next match. Skeledirge leads into Poliwrath. Safe switch into Shadow Malamar, going to bait out a Wigglytuff once again, and this Wigglytuff bait out has worked like a charm so far. Unfortunately, it looks like Malamar is not going to make it to a second superpower. It's going to be very close, but Malamar does not get damage registration error. This will still set up a pretty big farm down for the Skeledirge, but Skeledirge is going to be debuffed by Icy Wind. Opponent throws 2 and the move. Not the greatest timing ever, but they will still get that debuff applied. So Skeledirge is going to be at -1. Opponent sends in Furret as their final Pokemon. Pangoro going to be answered with the counter Poliwrath, and this is going to be a pretty difficult game to win. Pangoro baits with a Night Slash. Poliwrath calls the bait, and that is a very nice bait call by the opponent. They correctly identified that Pangoro so early in its switch clock would not want to debuff itself with the close combat. Icy Wind going to be debuffing Pangoro's attack. Pangoro goes for a second bait. Poliwrath this time will put up the shield. Pangoro can't get there, and unfortunately that game is over. Who knew that of all things, a counter Poliwrath would actually end up being a pretty big core breaker? Pretty nice lead in the next match. Skeledirge into Togekiss. Opponent safe switches into Licky Licky, and that's a decision they're quickly going to regret. Pangoro has such a dominant matchup into Licky Licky because 2 body slams plus the rollouts do not take the knockout as long as you have a pretty good IV Pangoro. Opponent overfarms, they end up throwing on alignment, so they do give a Karate Chop for free. Pangoro takes the body slam and is at the back-to-back close combats, which means if the opponent wants switch, they're going to have to give up both shields. They decide they're just going to let it go, but now Pangoro will get a close combat into the Togekiss. This is going to limit the farm, so Togekiss is only going to get a 1 peck head start. It looks like the opponent may have actually gotten 1 turn bring in there, so they didn't get the peck through. Close combat lands. Karate Chop is not going to do a whole lot of damage. In the back is Diggersby, and that's going to be answered with the Shadow Malamar. Even if no shields are used on the Shadow Malamar, this game should still end in a win, as a shield advantage Skeledirge is in a prime position to sweep. Malamar farms up, gonna go for the foul play bait. This to me feels like a pretty safe bait, because even if it ends up getting no shielded, it's still pretty valuable damage onto that Diggersby. Malamar, however, will put up a shield. If Malamar is gonna shield once in this matchup, it's not gonna be shielding twice, as having that shield intact for the Skeledirge is just simply too valuable. Malamar this time gonna full send Superpower connects, and that's gonna seal it. Malamar gonna bank a foul play for later, send in the Skeledirge. The Skeledirge is really not gonna have to worry too much about Psyshock. Psyshock lands, that is a very comfortable survive for the Skeledirge, and now the win is inevitable. Skeledirge undertaps the Torch Song, just looking to ramp up the Incinerate damage as much as it possibly can. While there's a move banked on Malamar, may as well close out the game with the GOAT Skeledirge. The shield comes up, Skeledirge barely can't get the farm down, but the good news is there's a Torch Song locked and loaded. It's a +1 Torch Song, down goes Togekiss, in comes Diggersby, Diggersby falls as well, and man is it good to see Skeledirge once again cooking in the Open Great League. We move to set number 2 as this trainer is pushing for Legend, picking up a pretty nice lead Skeledirge into Empoleon. Opponent safe switches into Quagsire, and that's going to be swiftly answered with the Shadow Malamar. This matchup can actually get quite uncomfortable because the Shadow Malamar is down energy and is at a pacing disadvantage. While Skeledirge into Empoleon is a good lead for Skeledirge in the 2 shield, the fewer shields that are in play or the more energy the Empoleon has, then the better the matchup is going to get. The opponent invests 1 shield in the Quagsire, Malamar is going to be shielding right back, and Malamar does have the foul play loaded. It's going to be a charge attack priority tie, foul play to the Aqua Tail, but Malamar has the higher attack stat. Malamar foul play is going to land, taking the knockout, but back in comes the Empoleon, and Empoleon is looking to completely run away with this game. Empoleon now has a ton of energy, Superpower will be shielded, and that's going to force an immediate pivot out into Pangoro. Something had to be switched in here. The Empoleon is up too much energy, it could not be allowed to farm down. Pangoro racing to the close combat, opponent doesn't go for the catch, and instead they're just going to get knocked out. That to me implies they're weak to the Pangoro in the back, and they are. There's another Galarian Corsola, and Pangoro is absolutely feasting on these Galarian Corsola. My goodness, Night Slash lands, very nice damage. Pangoro will get knocked out here by a Nightshade, but the opponent doesn't throw it. They could have thrown the Nightshade, it's a -2 Pangoro, it would have KO'd, but instead they take huge damage, and now in comes Skeledirge. Even though Nightshade is super effective damage, Skeledirge will be able to hang on. Skeledirge survives, will get the Incinerate down, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We move to the next game, picking up a pretty tricky lead Skeledirge into Credilli. I imagine the 1 shield is probably a pretty good matchup for the Skeledirge, but the zeros are not what Skeledirge is hoping for because Skeledirge will get outpaced. Credilli is able to make the Rock Tomb on perfect timing. Skeledirge no shields and pays a very heavy price. Skeledirge banks the Shadow Ball for later. In comes Shadow Malamar. Malamar's going for broke as it full sends Superpower. Foul Play would not take the knockout. Opponent calls the bait, and they get KO'd. They're now going to send out a Gourgeist, and if this is their best answer to a Shadow Malamar, then they just have no answer to Shadow Malamar on their team. Gourgeist is going to have to throw energy. They cannot get the farm down. They bank the Shadow Ball. In the back is Ludicolo. And not only are they triple weak to Malamar, they're triple weak to Pangoro, and they're triple grass. In comes Pangoro. Opponent realizes they simply can never win. They're not going to waste anyone's time, and they will concede the match. We move to the next game, Skeledirge into Alolan Sandslash. Now this is the dream lead. The entire team can hit Sandslash for devastating damage. Opponent safe switches into Ludicolo, and Ludicolo is going to be answered with Shadow Malamar. Now, Pangoro is the better check to the Ludicolo. However, I do get the idea behind bringing in the Malamar here. Malamar can basically just be fully thrown away, because with the Pangoro Skeledirge core, the Sandslash isn't going to be doing anything whatsoever. They try for a farm down, they're not going to get it, and Malamar is able to leave with a last-second foul play. The game pauses here, so it looks like the opponent may have just top left it out of the application, and it looks like they have. Malamar gets the farm down, and there it is. The opponent realizes they're just simply never winning that game. We move to the next match, Skeledirge leading into a Talonflame. Now this is a very Ivy-dependent CMP tie. Back when this was a pretty common meta matchup, I used to run a high-attack Skeledirge to guarantee the charge attack priority tie win in this matchup. But it looks like the opponent has a very high-ranked Talonflame, as even though this is a pretty good Skeledirge, Skeledirge is still able to win CMP. Skeledirge will shield once and look for a farm down. Opponent is going to be forced to pivot out, and they send in Shadow Primate. My guess is they're probably running Shadow Talonflame Double Fighter. That is a pretty common team. Rage Fist, massive damage, Skeledirge barely able to hang on. Skeledirge banks the energy and sends in the Shadow Malamar. But Shadow Malamar is going to take huge damage from the boosted Primeape, so Malamar is forced to go down the final shield as Primeape goes to the close combat. The opponent in the back, they have a Superior, and that is not what I was expecting to see whatsoever. If there had been a good Pokemon in the back, like let's say a Pangoro or something like that, this game would have probably been a loss. But it's Superior, a Pokemon that has been nerfed, and a Pokemon that power creep has really not been kind to. So this game is very winnable. Pangoro should be able to make a close combat. There's a ton of energy stored on the Skeledirge as well, so things are looking pretty good. In comes Pangoro, farming up, get a snipe, bank the close combat, and fire off the Torch Song. Torch Song will be able to deliver the knockout. Opponent pivots into the Talonflame, and they don't get that Incinerate to land. With the close combat banked, this game is over, because even if Superior is able to get the farm down, Superior will always lose charge attack priority. In comes Pangoro, close combat loaded. Man, that battle just shows how far Superior has fallen. Superior was up 2 shields to 0, and it still wasn't able to sweep and get the win. We move to the next match. Very scary lead Skeledirge in a Malamar. Malamar's energy goes everywhere into this team. Skeledirge banks to Incinerate, save switches into Malamar just for the opponent to send out Tinkaton. This is a very important bait out. Much like baiting out the Wigglytuff, you need to bait out the Fairy type to set up the Pangoro to sweep. Superpower does do big damage. Opponent lets a second Superpower be reached because they are trying to limit the amount of farm that Skeledirge is going to get. That second Superpower will get the Tinkaton very low. Tinkaton gets the launch energy at the -2 Malamar, and Malamar will no shield. Tinkaton goes to the Bulldoze, they get the debuff, they get the farm down, and that's the best case scenario for the opponent. Not only does Skeledirge only get 1 Incinerate, but Tinkaton exits with a Bulldoze loaded, and that will hit for big super effective damage. In the back, the opponent has a Licky Licky, and this is a core that Pangoro should be able to break, but there's so much energy on the Malamar. They pivot back in the Malamar. Pangoro is so far behind. Pangoro is in so much trouble. The only win con is to call a bait, no shields, calls the double resistant bait, and just like that, this game is suddenly winnable. Pangoro flexes, no shields, calls another bait. Bait call after bait call, opponent in shambles. All they had to do was full send superpowers and they were guaranteed to win, but they go for back-to-back baits, and suddenly, this Pangoro can never be farmed down. Night Slash takes the knockout, Pangoro gets the boost. This boost isn't even needed, but it's going to allow Pangoro to ramp up its damage even more. Night Slash gets the shield, Body Slam comes out from Licky Licky, shield comes up from Pangoro, and Pangoro is going to keep spamming out these Night Slashes. Each Night Slash getting this Licky Licky lower and lower and lower. Night Slash will be shielded. Pangoro gonna farm up. Will we see the catch attempt? There it is, but the opponent just doesn't have enough energy. They need to make it to a Shadow Ball plus a Body Slam. They're not gonna get there. Torch Song takes the knockout. That game looked like it was done. It was over with. There was no win con, but the opponent just kept never throwing superpower. They kept going for the baits. The baits kept being called, And against all odds, that was the final game to secure Legend, as Bodge is able to make Legend at 3,018 elo. Big congratulations. It really does warm my heart to see Skeledirge making it to Legend rank, having success in the Open Great League in Season 26 of Pokemon GO Battle League. Prime Skeledirge, it was one of my favorite Pokemon to use. His ability to ramp up with Torch Song, Shadow Ball hitting for devastating damage. Skeledirge has always just been an incredibly fun mon across the board. I do think the current Open Great League meta, at least in previous seasons, was pretty hostile to it. There was a lot of water, and that made it tougher to run Skeledirge. But against all odds, Bodge was able to have great results with it this season. This was not a Pokemon that if you'd asked me if I believed in Skeledirge this season, I probably would have said no. Just because there's so much Quagsire, there's so much Licky. But I think pairing it with a Pokemon like Pangoro was a very, very smart idea, because Pangoro just does such a nice job at core breaking so many teams. So even if you're in a spot where Skeledirge can't necessarily do a lot, let's say into like a Licky and a Quagsire duo, then if you're able to get an advantage on Pangoro, then Pangoro's close combats are going to absolutely shred through both of those Pokemon. So I think it's a very well-constructed team. There are definitely some teams that are just very much disrespecting fire right now. Like there's a lot of Volt Switch Fortress or Bug Bite Fortress plus Wigglytuff, and Skeledirge would just absolutely eat those teams for breakfast. When the Great League does return, and I'm not just talking about the Preview Cup, because the Preview Cup is obviously available right now, but queue times are pretty rough in it. I do actually want to try out this team, because this looks like an incredibly fun team to use. Skeledirge being able to boost through opponents. Shadow Malamar has always been a Pokemon that I've enjoyed to play. I think my favorite all-time Open Great League meta was the season right before all of those buffs to bug types, where Shadow Malamar was released. It was right when Tinkaton was first released as well. And that Shadow Malamar, Furret, and Tinkaton team was just absolute freelo. I remember there was a Go Battle Week where I was able to climb from 2,000 elo up to 3,500 in 7 days, just because of how incredibly overpowered Malamar was. In my eyes, I do view the bug buffs that happened the season after that as a misstep as far as Open Great League metas go. I don't really know of anyone who is too hype about Bug Bite as a whole. I know they wanted to try and curtail the influence of Malamar, but I feel like there was better ways to do that other than just buffing bug types. With nerfs at the start of this season, they finally got rid of Shadow Scizor, but I honestly wouldn't mind seeing Fortress go. Fortress has been pretty solid for a while. I feel especially with the Sand Tomb buff this season, where we're really starting to see what Shadow Bug Bite Fortress can do. And I don't know if it's a healthy influence on the meta. I would argue it's a pretty negative influence across the board. So, as someone who really appreciates Malamar, I know I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, I wouldn't mind seeing Bug Bite end up getting nerfed back down, so that way we can have a different meta where Pokemon like Malamar can more easily thrive. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated, so thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.